Well, good morning. Good morning, everybody. I hope, unlike Valerie and I, everyone had a decent night's sleep. I think some of us were up too late last night. But I'm very both excited but honored to be on stage with these two extraordinary women to talk about how women have been on the front lines of democracy and leadership. Valerie Jarrett, who is just described as one of the longest serving advisors to a US president, President Obama, who I was privileged to serve in the Obama administration. And Swiatłana Cichanouska, who is the leader of the Belarus opposition. Both of you women working in spaces that are predominantly male. And so let's dig into the state of female leadership in the world today. Swiatłana, I want to start with you. You call yourself an accidental politician. As many in the audience already know, you ran for president of Belarus in 2020 after your husband ran and was subsequently incarcerated, arrested, imprisoned for his political campaign. You now live in exile. And your husband is still incarcerated. And I remember when you and I were last together, it was a year ago in Munich, and you were carrying a picture of your husband, and you said you had not been able to see him or speak to him in a year. I see that you have his photo in your lap. Can you give us an update on what his situation is currently?
Thank you. Everybody who is presented here, you are here because you are supporting democracy, and we are people who directly fighting against autocracy right now. And of course, there are always victims of authoritarian regime, and one of them is my husband. You're right, he's already 5 years in prison, and last more than 2 years I haven't heard a word from him. We call this incommunicado, when regime put political prisoners in full isolation, maybe to persuade them that the world has forgotten about them, that the world is not fighting for our heroes behind the bars. But I have to underline that, except my husband, there are at least 1,200 political prisoners behind them, behind bars, and at least 150 women. So women are suffering for their heroism, for they desire to build a better future for their children as well. And recently, 2 women died after they have been released. They haven't survived even half a year after all these atrocities and physical and moral humiliation they experienced in prison. So regime detains people, regime kills people, and believe me, all those people who are behind bars, they believe in us, they believe in you, the democratic countries have enough power to rescue all those people who sacrificed their freedom for the values we all share.
You know, in a way, Swiatłana, what happened in Belarus was an indicator of some of the fractured geopolitical situation in Europe. It was pre the invasion, the Russian invasion in Ukraine in 2022. The status of the peace talks seem to change every day, depending on who you speak with. I wonder what your view is on the current state of those talks, and how would a peace deal potentially open up an opportunity for you to return home to Belarus and have a role in a democratic, ideally a democratic society?
First of all, I want to underline that we all want peace in our region and all over the world, but this is not what dictators want. Dictators don't need peace because wars fuels their regime, wars justify repressions in their countries, and just yesterday, Minister Sikorski told that it was last chance for Putin, and he didn't use this. So I think that the world understands that only pressure, only tough policy on dictators can really change their behavior. So in the case of Belarus, we understand that Lukashenko, dictator of Belarus, is on the side of Putin. He betrayed Belarusian people. He gave our country as launchpad for attacking Ukraine. And Belarusian people who are fully pro-European, who are fully anti-war and pro-Ukrainian. And of course, this possible peace negotiations that might be take place in the future, they can influence situation in Belarus a lot. Because if this deal will be on the conditions of Ukraine, it will give Belarusian people window of opportunity to dismantle this regime, to uprise again. Though, of course, all these 5 years, we are not just sitting and waiting for the window of opportunity. We are working hard, to weaken the regime, to strengthen people, strengthen resilience, strengthen civil society. But, of course, we need allies on this path, and you are all here on the democratic world, of course, trying to support us. But if this peace will be on the condition of Russia, or if it will seem like Russia wins this fight, it will be defeat not only of Ukraine or Belarusian people, it will be defeat of Europe and all democratic world. Because if you give this chance, for Russia to show its strength, they will not stop in Ukraine. They will go further and further and further. And that's why I think that it's very important to understand strategic importance of Belarus, that only free and democratic Belarus can be a good ally to our neighbors. It could be a source of stability and peace and not source of constant threat that we see now. So that's why it's very important to include Belarusian topic in these peace negotiations and don't leave Belarus overlooked or don't leave Belarus as cancellation prize for Putin, because it will be like constant threat from our territory, not only from Ukraine, but also for our European neighbors.
Well, and also as you have once said, the important role that women have played in Belarus in terms of the opposition movement, and in fact, for you yourself, you would not have gotten involved in politics, and were forced to, in a way, given the restrictions on free speech and democracy, and it's really led to women's participation at unprecedented levels, with you being their leader. And the importance of our allies is now at the highest level it may have been in a long time. So, Valerie, I want to switch to you for a moment, then I'm going to come back to ask you both a few questions. But because we're talking about women in political spaces, in your book, Finding My Voice, you talk about the first 6 months of working in President Obama's administration and what was, as you term, a macho atmosphere that you encountered, and it was something that you had to take to the president yourself to be addressed. Tell us what that experience was.
Oh, well, thank you, Huma, and good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. It's my third trip back to Impact, so I'm delighted to be here. So I think the point that you're making, Huma, is culture. You have to really work hard to create the kind of culture you want. And President Obama believed that it was important to have women at the table. Half of our department heads in the White House were women. We had women all throughout the administration in political positions. But the guys were still kind of hanging together, and many of them had known him from the campaign, and the culture wasn't what it should be. And so I used my voice, and because of my relationship with the president, to say, when you're in the room, everybody's being good to one another. But when you're not in the room, sometimes the men are drowning out the women. And he said, I will make better decisions if I have the benefit of the wise counsel of the women who were there. And so he decided to have a dinner with all of the women, and I had talked to them ahead of time, and I said, you have to speak up, and you have to tell them that there's a problem, because your temptation will be to say, oh, no, sir, everything's fine, because he's the president, and you don't want to trouble him. But he's trying to create a unique culture here. And One of the ways in which we ended up supporting each other is after the dinner, where they were very frank and open with him, he said, I'm going to go back and talk to the guys, but I need your voices. I will make better decisions with your voices. And that was incredibly empowering. And then we started hanging out with one another, and we became friends. And when you go into a meeting and you see somebody you've just been with the night before, you know their story, it helps give you a stronger sense of voice and supporting one another. And one of the ways in which I think, not just in the United States, but around the world, is that we need more women leaders who are willing to use their voices to help other women and bring them to the table. And that's how we begin to change the culture, and that's how we begin to change who is elected in office. And let's face it, the world would be better off if more women were in power.
Well, and also the point, I definitely agree with that. But not just changing things symbolically, but structurally, and how much effort you have to intentionally put into changing.
It doesn't just happen because you wish it. Because certainly President Obama was raised by a single mom who worked. His grandmother worked. He's married to a very accomplished woman. He has 2 daughters. I mean, you had him with hello. But what we learn is it's not enough to just wish it. You have to make it happen and be quite intentional. And you have to, if you're in a leadership position, the way he was, and frankly, the way the women were, the way your immediate boss, Secretary Clinton, was, you have to reinforce it throughout the organization. It doesn't just happen because the person at the top wants it, although tone does start at the top.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I want to turn back for a minute to the state of democratic institutions globally. And Valerie, what parallels do you see between the threats to democracy abroad in countries like Belarus and the challenge that we're currently facing domestically in the US? Where do you see opportunities for global solidarity?
Well, look, I think many of us believe in democracy, but it is not a spectator sport. It doesn't self-execute. You have to get in there and get involved, and you have to ensure that you are electing people who believe in democratic principles. And right now, Huma, I do think that a lot of people are questioning the validity of those basic institutions that support democracy. But the solution isn't to shun those institutions or not vote or not engaged. The solution is to get involved and to find the kinds of people who represent your values, encourage them to run for office, and then support them when they are in office. And there is this major threat that is not just in the United States, it's global. Disinformation, a huge challenge to just like, what is the truth? And right now, when people are getting their information from TikTok, not the most reliable source. How do we raise young people to be critical thinkers and to do the research? Because now it's on us, the consumer. It used to be you just read the news and you knew it was pretty accurate, and that's not the case anymore. What are we going to do to ensure that we're not just societies of the rich and the poor? We're building a strong middle class. That's another threat to our democracies that we can all get involved in. And then the final point I would make is pluralism, a word that people don't necessarily focus on. But one of the challenges is, how do we disagree without being disagreeable? How are we curious? I'm so curious to learn more about you and what your life was like and the challenges that you faced. And so many people now are not doing that. They're living in their own little echo chambers, reinforced by what they hear, as opposed to being really interested and curious and finding the tools to disagree in a reasonable way and to look for common ground. Because I do find when you hear somebody's story and you understand like how they were raised and what their values are, even if you might disagree about an issue in politics, that doesn't mean that you can't find the humanity in one another, and women are better at that, I think.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I'd love to talk to both of you about the role of women in grassroots movements and practical strategies you've seen at work when it comes to the defense and revitalization of democratic values. Swiatłana, you ran for president in Belarus not as a lifelong politician. This was a citizen, an active citizen standing up for your values. In what ways were you underestimated as a woman in that position?
You know, I think that it's a problem of all post-Soviet Union countries that lived under this patriarchal system, that the place of woman is in the kitchen, you know, bringing up children, but not in politics, you know, in policies, so on and so forth. And we always underestimated ourselves. What can we do? You know, we are like shadows of our men. But you know, when moment comes, historical moment come to the countries, you know, we really find this strength in ourselves, you know, to stand up and to fight. And I think that Belarusian situation, Belarusian uprising, is a wonderful example of women self-confidence. Because when our men were detained, a huge amount of men were detained at the first days of our uprising, these were women, you know, who stepped in, you know, stood in front of this, you know, brutally among people and just told, we are going to defend our men, we are going to defend our children and our future. And I remember how these policemen didn't know what to do with women because it was shock. But then, of course, you know, they started to beat, rape, and intimidate women as well. But nevertheless, and now, during these 5 years, we have built democratic structures, yes, in exile. But I see how women leading civil society organization, leading media, leading democratic structures, and so on and so forth. So I think that women are more effective in marathons on long distance. Women have more empathy. We understand that we are not just building our careers, but we are responsible for something bigger, something more important. It's values, it's our children, it's the future of your country and globally. So that's why I'm so inspired by President Obama's approach that we have to build institutions where more women included, because we really think broader and we really can bring changes in world order.
Well, it's really an extraordinary story of how clamping down on the democratic institutions is what led to this rise of women's leadership, not by choice in a way, but by necessity and force, and patriotism. Patriotism, yeah, is a big part of it. Valerie, I'd love to hear your views on this. You've had a front row seat. I've been lucky to be there for part of it with you. What are the most significant shifts you have seen in the last 2 decades in terms of women in leadership positions in the U.S.?
Well, we're building a better pipeline, and I think that's what we need. We need to have women who run for office, not just run for president, but who's the mayor, who's on the city council, who's in the state legislature, and the more used to people become. And it's a culture issue in the United States, too. Look, we've had 2 in the last 10 years really competent women run for president. And our country didn't seem to be quite ready for that yet. But the good news is we have women who are governors, and so they're getting more used to seeing women in the executive branch. We are having an increasing number of women who are CEOs of corporations. And so I think this shift is going to be gradual, but I do think we're making progress. And as more people get comfortable with women in leadership roles, then there will be more support. But when women show up for women, and look, in our country, the majority of women in the elections were not even voting for these incredible candidates who were running. So we have to get women engaged and feel this sense of empowerment. And I do completely agree with you. The empathy factor, the sense of being a part of something bigger than yourself, I do think resonates. We just have to get that word out there.
I want to give you the last word, Swiatłana. Every time I see you, I'm just amazed at your strength and your determination to fight for democracy for your country. But it's hard not to remember the personal sacrifice that you continue to make. How do you keep your spirits going, and are you optimistic today?
Look, I have to be optimistic, because if you lose your optimism, you lose energy to continue to fight. I just want to say that very often in democratic countries especially, fight for democracy sounds very romantic. Oh, it's so nice, you know, it's so brave to fight against dictatorship. But path to democracy is paved with the tears and fear and sacrifice, and there is nothing romantic about this. You every day live with pain for all those people behind the bars, for the people who have to flee the country because of repressions and trying to settle down in new life. So it's extremely difficult. But you understand your responsibility. You understand that you have to do this because this is the future of your children, of future generation, of your country, of your national identity. And I just want democratic world to think about this again and again, because democracy will not save itself naturally. We have to contribute in this, and not only politicians, but ordinary people, businesses, IT specialists. We are all responsible for saving democracy and countering this poison and propagandistic dictatorship messages. Hold not business-oriented policy, but values-oriented policy, because it's very easy to lose what you have, and very difficult and painful to gain it back.
I think that is something that resonates with all of us, that we cannot assume that democracy will always just exist naturally. So I want to thank you both for your leadership, your work, your inspiration, and your courage. And thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.